Hi, guys, and welcome back to the India Gill podcast. I am your host, India Gill. And this, as you know, is a space for real, raw conversations to take place. You know, the conversations that we weren't taught to have, but that we deeply need to have. And simultaneously, it's a space to unlearn and to learn in order to literally become the best version of ourselves on this human journey that we all find ourselves on together. And in keeping with that, I've got a really special guest on today, a friend, and this isn't an interview or anything like that. This is just a chat between two friends. And Amber Jeffrey has started, do you know, she started a podcast called The Grief Gang many years ago. And I'm going to say it's not just a podcast. She's created a community. And I would also offer, because I've had, some experience of her community, that it's actually turning into a movement. And it's a topic that touches all of our lives, whether we rally against it, whether we choose to talk about it or not, it touches all of our lives. So, and I guess to a degree, we've considered it quite taboo because it's a scary topic. And Amber brings humor to it. And she brings her own special personality, which is one of the things I love about her. Now, before I ask Amber to introduce herself, I just want to say a thank you to her because a couple of years ago, when I first had this idea of starting a podcast, she was my only touchstone for podcasts because I'd only just started listening to them. She was the only one I knew that had a podcast. So I reached out to her and I was like, hey, Amber, I want to start a podcast and da. And Amber, what you did is you invited me to that beautiful club of yours, Soho River House, and we had lunch. And, you said a couple of things to me there. I'm going to get emotional now. And you were like, India, just start. And then you said, if you need anything, you know where I am. I'm like crap at getting back really quickly, but I'm there. And then what you continued to do was send me a whole list of links to, all sorts of equipment, etc., which I then disregarded because life happened and I didn't start it. But then again, when I thought, right, I'm just going to do it now, I remembered you saying, just start. Don't worry about the tech stuff and all of that, which was what. So thank you. And Amber Jeffrey,
Oh,
host
India,
of the
what an
podcast, The Grief Gang.
introduction. My goodness, what an introduction. You're making me blush from the get-go.
Oh,
Thank you for such a wonderful introduction. It is such a delight to be here with you. And I'm so glad you did just bloody do it. You went and you did it. And
oh,
you don't need to hold anything of not taking my advice or anything when it was. We all press the go button when we feel ready to. And all it matters is that you've arrived now, right? And you're doing the thing now. And that's the part of, no one starts perfectly. Gosh, when I think about when I started the podcast, which of course I'll go into a little bit about, I had not the foggiest idea. I was really like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. It was truly terrible. And but that is part of the journey, the word journey. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but that is the part of, stumbling as you go, and then you find your formula and then you rehash at your formula again and again and again. And that is the complete fun, specifically in podcasting. And really, I guess any sort of creative expression, you don't start perfect, you just start point blank. But thank you for inviting me on. It really feels wonderful to be here. And it's so amazing to kind of the meshing of, now my new world and the work that I do and how you align in that as well. And kind of both of our previous worlds from our ex-airport days, which I'm sure we'll have a little giggle about as well. And like, what are the chances, India? Imagine if when we were at Virgin many moons ago, if someone came up to our desk and said, you two will do a podcast one day and you'll be doing this and you'll be doing that. We'd be like, what? Like, just give me your bag and let me check you in and off you go.
Our little Virgin community. Thank you, Richard Branson.
Thank you, Richard Branson. Thank you, Big Rich, you absolute legend. But
honestly,
I know what a lifetime ago that really does feel like. But to give a little introduction to myself, to your wonderful listeners. So my name is Amber Jeffrey. And I'm the creator of a podcast, community, and now business called The Grief Gang. And a bit of context as to how the Grief Gang came to be. And the Grief Gang was born whilst I was in my virgin days. A lot of people probably think when it's the lingo when we say our virgin days, right? They think, what, when you were an actual virgin?
I
Like,
think you need to
no,
explain
actually.
that, Amber.
We need to really be quite specific when we say that. The Virgin Atlantic days, not when we were
Yep.
virginial. But so the Grief Gang, so to go right back in 2016, my mum Sue died of a very sudden heart attack, and I was 19 and she was 51 at the time. And she was my first and only immediate loss. Prior to that, I'd lost my grandmother a month before, but she lived in the Caribbean, so we weren't as close. So my mum was my first primary and immediate, and my God, it was an absolute doozy of a death. And so I was completely thrusted into the world of grief, quite hardcore of like, okay, you want to lose someone, we're going to take your mum. I was like, wow. And I was at that point still, I had just started actually my first job in the airport, not at Virgin. It was my first kind of big girl job. And I was just kind of finding my feet in the world and in my career and in my sense of self and my, trying to build what was my moral compass. What are my values as a young adolescent woman and amongst my peers as well, trying to experience life. And I had no one in my peer group who knew grief like how I was beginning to get to know it, and dancing with the various different layers of it. And it was isolating, it was lonely, and it was rage inducing. And so for about 3 years post my mum's death, that's exactly kind of what I did. I kind of just navigated the world in this ball of loneliness and anger and fear, quite frankly, until the September of 2019, when I was actually still at Virgin. And I remember actually speaking with some staff there about how low I really, really was. And actually thinking about it, there was some really key people at Virgin Atlantic who really were amazing shoulders to lean on. And yeah, I have a soft spot in my space and my heart for Virgin, as much some hard spots as well, some soft spots too. And I basically came to a really big head with my mental health, and I was depressed and borderline suicidal. And I knew in my heart, for me, that was just feelings that I had never experienced before. And I knew that I had to do something about it. I knew I couldn't just perhaps sit on my hands and ride it out. I knew I didn't have the luxury to just kind of wait for this to kind of ride out. I knew that quite literally my life was on the line and that I could potentially do something quite dangerous to myself. And so I went down the route of exploring counseling and therapy. And at that time, and I say that specifically, it didn't work for me. It's not to say that it doesn't now. And I've since, gone back into the therapy room and built a really wonderful relationship with my therapist. But that took a lot of unlearning to learn again, as you said in your introduction. But for me, that was a real hard thing to process, that I felt that therapy didn't work for me. I felt quite broken, that I couldn't even mesh with a therapist, and that I was perhaps really that damaged that, gosh, even a therapist can't help me here. And that was really damning and really quite shameful. I remember carrying quite a bit of shame across that. But that kind of, in a weird way, dissipated quite quickly, because that was kind of the August 2019. And then by the September, myself and my partner, we went away on a holiday to Morocco. And at this time, I was beginning to listen to podcasts. Like, podcasts were kind of becoming the thing. Like, they were kind of getting onto the scene a little bit. And I thought, oh, what's this? And so I started listening to like some quite fun ones, like little girl chat kind of ones, girl bathroom kind of things. And then I thought, whilst we were literally, I can see it in my mind's eye, we were in Luton Airport in the gate room. And before we got on, I thought, let me just see if there's some grief podcasts out there. And so I threw in grief into the search bar and had like probably about two handfuls of podcasts come up. And I thought, oh, shit, like there's actually an appetite for this. I wonder what these people have to say. And so I downloaded a few to listen on the flight, and I listened and I was like, wow, this is great. And I was really absorbing it. But there was just this small part of me that was like, something's missing here. Like, there wasn't really at that time someone who was speaking for me at that age. I was 22. 22 or 21, turning 22 perhaps, and there wasn't someone who was speaking from the active place of being a young person actively going through grief in that moment. They were almost talking about it from a distance, which I could appreciate because I knew that was giving me information for when I eventually arrive at that point. But I was like, I needed something here and now of someone talking about what the experience of being a young person talking about grief is. And so that kind of like just sat in the back of my mind for the holiday. And as the days transpired, I kind of just went completely delusional. There was a really bad case of food poisoning, so that really probably assisted it as well. And I just sat there on a sun lounger with my partner, and all of a sudden I just went, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to do it. And my partner was quite like, what? Because I hadn't voiced really any of this. It was just all internally in my mind, these thoughts going on. I was thinking, should I do that? That's quite interesting. Maybe that could be quite fun. And I just kind of sat in a sun lounge. I turned to him and said, I think I'm going to start a podcast. And he said, on what? And I said, grief. And he was like, what? Bring me up to speed. Like, what's your train of thought here? And so I did. And then I remember oh God, it's actually quite lovely to reminisce about these memories. I haven't sat and really thought about it for quite a long while. It'll be 6 years in September. And kind of, I remember searching like how to start a podcast, how to find a name for a podcast. And I remember the first thing it said was, don't run away with the first name that you have. And I was like, I already had the Grief Gang. I just sat there and I went, I'm going to call it the Grief Gang. And then it said, don't run away with the first name that you have. And I was like, sod that, this name is great. And I knew it. And I said, I'm sticking it. Yeah. And I said, sod that. I said, I'm keeping this name. And I did. And I ran with it. And so jumping forward to coming back home, I just came home and I was like, right, I voiced it out loud and I was like, I have to follow through with it. I kind of couldn't put it into the ether and not follow through. And so I came home, I bought the equipment, that same equipment that I sent to you. This is the same equipment that I have had since day one and it's never failed me. It's quite clunky, but it does the job. It's my trusty equipment. And I bought it on Amazon, spent a little small fortune on it. And just sat down one day and told my story, recorded it from A to B, every minute detail of what happened to my mum and what happened to us, what has happened in those previous 3 years, just really essentially diary dumped. I then created the Instagram account and I remember sharing it on like my Facebook and my Instagram, and lots of people from the Virgin Atlantic family were so supportive, and friends and family. And at that time, India, it wasn't a thing of I'm going to make this whatever it amounts to be. It was just I need to just say a lot of things about what's been on my head and my heart for the past 3 years. And if it helps at least one person, then I think I'll be really, really happy about that. And so I shared my story and other aspects of my grieving process up until that point. And as I began to share, it transpired and grew bigger than just my friends and family, reading it and supporting it. And it started to reach strangers and other people, and they would respond, whether it's to the podcast or the content I was putting out, and say, yeah, me too. I understand what you're saying there. And then some more. And I was like, wow, there is a community out here of people who are, not only experiencing this, but ready and willing to talk about it. And that was the part where it kind of changed for me, where I thought, oh, this is bigger than just my story. And I don't want to just share my story. I want to share everyday people's stories of their grief. And that's exactly then what began to happen. And then rolled in COVID. So up until that point, I had been interviewing my guests in person. I was going around the country and meeting people. And then COVID hit and lockdown, and I had to take it all online. And as me and you both know, some people were made furloughed from our jobs. So essentially, I was given this, as much as I didn't feel like it at the time, and how scary COVID and lockdown was, and especially in our industry of work, in the airport industry at that time, that furlough season and that furlough period was perhaps one of the most gifted things that I got, because I was able to one, still earn in some way, and two, have all this time to give to my community and to connect with my community. And that's exactly what I did for the whole of 2020. I just was able to, pour into the podcast. I was able to pour into the community. We did so many things virtually. I was able to talk to them and they were to talk to me, and we got to know each other. We really built from strength to strength. And of course, the devastating aspect that the community rocketed during that year because of COVID and the horrific mass deaths that we were seeing, me and my peers who were doing fellow work in the space were at times the first point of call for people if they lost a loved one. So that was a real shift in kind of the work that we were doing. It kind of went from, oh, this isn't just maybe perhaps a fun little Instagram page that we do. We are actually perhaps a really vital resource. And, learning to understand the responsibility of that to some degree. Then I was 22, turning 23 was huge. Was like, oh shit, this is more than just me and my story. There is perhaps a due diligence by community and by service here. And, am I willing to step up to the plate in that degree? And I'd have people in the space who, perhaps, when I say couldn't step up to the plate, not in critique, but realizing, oh, this is a big deal. This is a big responsibility here. Mm-hmm. And so essentially that was me, and was me for the, from 2019 up until 2023, just doing it alongside my jobs. Obviously I was made redundant from Virgin in the second wave. I got booted out. And then they asked me back a year later, and I said, piss off, but I did come back and I hated it.
I was waiting for when this language was going to come in.
I'm trying to be good. I'm trying to be good because you're so good, but you're so ladylike, India. You're such a queen. I don't want to be crass in front of you.
Amber, I want to start by saying this because people do this to me. They won't swear in front of me, or they'll apologize when they do. You should hear me on a bad day. Like literally, I would put a rap star to shame.
You're like a sailor.
That's what I love about you.
Yeah.
So this is one of the this is why I have the friends that I have in my world, and I see this in you. You're just you, and that's what this podcast is about.
Yeah,
being authentically you, just unfiltered.
Totally.
And
I feel like when people are,
and you know what the beautiful thing with you is you.
Yeah.
Go on.
I was just saying, I don't know how to be anything else. That's the part when I think I don't know how to be anything else.
I think that's your superpower. I just did a post on Instagram the other day, and I was just like, be you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
that is your superpower. That is how you're connecting.
Nice. Yeah, that's so
you use so many. Oh, that's such a rich story, Amber. And one of the words that you used in different ways there was being of service. And even though you didn't start out that way, it's become a huge service. And at that young age, that's one of the questions that came up for me. Like, what surprised you most about grief at that age? Not now, but like when you were experiencing it, because there is no guidebook, right?
Yeah.
For grief. And actually, it's quite a private, in the West especially, it's quite a private thing, grieving, whereas being an Indian in the Asian community is very communal.
Yes.
And I think that's actually quite a balm. It's very healing, especially for that initial period.
Yes.
So what was the surprising thing about grief?
Yes, absolutely. I love that. I think for me, India as well, just touching on what you said there about in your culture of how, and that's the part I think that really irks me, of how when the narratives that I see and seeing impacted on people that I meet, and even on myself, like reflecting back of, bringing it back to your question there of how the thing that I realized, or that I kind of, absorbed was, I really absorbed that this is something that I just have to go through alone. I just have to individually deal with this. And it was only when I started Grief Gang and realizing, oh, I was never, ever meant to do this on my own. And we, as every single human being, are never meant to navigate and go through grief on our own. Granted, there are some things that we have to sit with on our own and to process, but for the long part of it, we are not meant to bear witness to our own grief alone. It is a path to be walked together because it is so universal. And I think it can get misconflated because, of course, each grief is individual and subjective subjective. Only we have the relationships with our people that we have lost, but the overall experience of grief is so universal. And particularly this week, I've actually been talking with a lot of people, whether it's been in interviews or friends and family and all my clients, and how the idea that love is the greatest connector of us all, but actually I think it's grief. But that, in the weird juxtaposition that that grief is love in some way, that it's kind of like almost love is kind of the lovely cushion or the plush that we say is the connector, but actually it's grief that's behind it, that's pulling the strings, and it's that one that's pulling us together. Because when you think about it, when I meet, not only in my life, the people that I have the deepest connections with, whether it's professionally or personally, are people who have walked through grief. And when I say grief, I don't just mean by the death of a loved one. Anyone who has lost something, who has in some ways gone to the depths of it, or depths of their soul and depths of their lives, and the pain of it, and risen, or not even, but they have been there, they have looked behind the curtain and gone, oh my God, that is horrific, and they've come back and gone, right, I have bared witness to that, how do I now want to live my life accordingly? And so it's those parts, when I do think back to those early years for me, the isolation that not only I felt I was maybe put in by some people, but B, put myself in. I am very much in my, and not long really after my mum's death, I was able to sit with the accountability of what parts I played in my suffering. And that and I think that is sometimes a really hard pill to take, because you can think, you just want to point the fingers out to the rest of the world and the people who have done you wrong, or this and that. But actually, there are sometimes three fingers pointing back at you. And this isn't to make yourself feel like shit or to do whatever, but to hold yourself accountable. And I think the wonderful thing about that is when you can actually point at yourself and go, oh, maybe I need to be accountable for some of my things. You can also then be accountable for your change. And I think that's the most wonderful part of how, when you are pointing outwards at all the things that are wrong, or perhaps people have done wrong by you, that is kind of out of your control. You can't control anyone else. You can't control their reactions and how they treat you. But when you can kind of reflect in, and so, like, example for that for me was, when I realized, oh, I'm so angry at the world and everyone in it, instead of me pointing it outwards and pointing it back to me of like, I am so angry, and I was like, I hate this about myself, I absolutely hate it. I didn't have to succumb to just, oh, well, this is just me. I thought, I can make a change about that. I can actually, that is within my remit, that is within my control. And so, although being able to swallow that hard pill of like, oh God, maybe I have made some mistakes, maybe I have burnt some bridges that I perhaps wouldn't have wanted to, or behaved in certain ways, what can I do with that information now to better support myself, to make better decisions for me and by me in my grief? And so, but that realization was not done in isolation. That accountability piece and that self-compassion was done in community, was done by meeting other people who had navigated similar, who were in compassion with me, who every time I maybe picked up the baton and went to batter myself, they took it out of my hand and went, no, you don't need to do that anymore. I would never have taken the baton out of my hand and stopped giving myself such a hard time if it wasn't for community and for compassion. And I learned self-compassion and self-love through community. So for me, it is absolutely community is the bedrock of my life. It's completely in the foundations. I am nothing without, and when I say this, I say I'm nothing without community, and I don't mean that I am nothing without my community and grief gang, because that's very like that's dependent. But I mean, it is, I think I'm nothing without the people in my life. That's my friends, my family, my loved ones, my community, every aspect of it. Community is what makes us human.
Wow, again, so much to unpack. That you're so young. That's what strikes me. And all of these learnings that you've had at that young age in your 20s, that was a lot. You took radical responsibility. And when we take radical responsibility, as much as we don't want to look at our part in things, that empowers us and shows us that actually, when I take radical responsibility for this, I'm in charge. I can change this, which is kind of like what you did, and all these bridges that you'd burnt. And maybe you've gone back and, had a look at that. And you said something about how grief and love, is like two totally different things. And it reminded me of, and I use it when I have someone in therapy, when I have somebody in therapy and they talk about a loss. And the way I look at it, and something I've learned, and I don't know where I picked this up, is that grief is the price we pay for love, right? Isn't that a beautiful? I just really love that line.
I too.
You were so, so, so young. If you were to give advice to your 19-year-old self now, with all this wisdom and knowledge and, fostering of community that you have, what would you say to her, that young
Oh, it's
19-year-old
such a
girl
big
down
question,
there?
that, India. And there's so many things I would say to her. For a long time, the thing that I would always, whenever I would sit with that with myself, or if I was asked it, I would always kind of go to my go-to answer of, just don't be so angry at the world. But that, when I used to say that in response to a question like that, that was most definitely from a place of shame. And that was still from a
Mm,
place of shame, where I was still carrying a lot of that shame and guilt for being so angry. And I would perhaps in a way would maybe rephrase it in as such of, your anger. If I was to go for like, you were going to go through the motions, and your anger, as ugly and as hard as it will be the catalyst that will change your life. And to not, I would probably say to, as going along the journey, to just feel everything and to not feel shame for it. But then in the part, I feel like there's so many things that could go back to her and say, and whether it be like, don't do this or do that or feel this, I think I would just say to her, just take it all in. It all makes sense in the end. It all makes sense in the end, in terms of everything that I went through, whether it was going through the angry period of my life and then feeling
mm,
shameful about it, and then learning to unpack that shame and not. The roller coaster of it has all brought me to where I am today. And perhaps maybe in a way I'd just say to her, just hold on, because life does really get good again. And that everything that you go through, not only just the
mm,
death of mum and then the death of my friend Poppy and all other life's hardships, and the kind of rebuilding myself, I would just say to her, it all makes sense in the end. I know it doesn't make sense right now at all, that your mum has died and you're 19 and she's just taken from your life, and when I say it all makes sense, it doesn't mean that I'm saying everything, it all happened for a reason and whatnot, but just that you will begin to
mm,
make sense of your life and sense of your purpose and sense of your calling. And you will arrive at a place that you really, really, really like your life. You really like your life, and you really like
mm,
yourself, and you really like yourself for all that you have gone through and achieved and survived. Like, I think if I was to go back to 19-year-old Amber and lay out the course of the previous 9 years, I think she'd absolutely go, "Oh my God, I can't do that." I'd say, "Yeah, but you
mm.
do. But like you do get through it, and you really do come out the other side really, really good."
Wow. Do you know, I just feel like this is a testimony to your mum. This is kind of like not just your legacy, but hers as
Mm,
well, the work that you're doing, the service, the
mm,
and I don't even think of it as just a community, it's a movement. It's much bigger than the communities that we foster here. It's
mm,
like everywhere. I mean, when I started this podcast, it just reminded me, somebody reached out to me from LA who I haven't been in touch with for years, who
mm,
hasn't liked, subscribed, or whatever you do. My
yeah.
niece told me off about that. She's like, boy, it's not like, subscribe on there. She said, that's Instagram. It's like follow, subscribe, and share. And I was like, okay, Avneet. But who was like, oh, I'm listening to it out there. So you with your community and the numbers that you have, oh my God, the service that you're doing is wow.
Mm. Yeah,
You're, you're
it's
reaching people that you probably will never know that you've reached,
I know,
touched.
yeah. To me, like, and it is India. I think for me, genuinely, it is never about the numbers for me. As things
Mm,
grow and things do, I think that is because in context of what I do, I think I know as my numbers grow, whether that is followers, listeners, in whatever quantity it is, I know that that is someone who's clicking the follow on the Instagram or listen to the podcast. That's someone who needs this, and though
yes.
there is such a juxtaposition in that and a dual edge of how wow, okay, someone is now finding it and they found this service. I'm so pleased about that. I'm really glad they found me and found the community. And then the other coin of, I'm so sad that they need this. I'm so saddened that they have experienced some form of loss in their life, that they need a service like mine. So it's kind of, as the numbers grow and develop and I get to know more people, there is a real, it's almost like quite a melancholy feeling of it, of this kind of subtle joy, but also this kind of sadness that a service like mine and many of my peers is even needed. And I know that might sound silly because it's like, of course people die, but it's just like, it's really sad when you see that number, and I just think, fuck, that's a lot of people who are affected in some way, know what the feelings in my heart is, and that's quite a thing to hold. But it is still weird. I still think, to be honest, that it's only like my friends and family who listen to the podcast, not like however many thousands of people who listen. And I'm like, oh wow. And in a way, I have always stayed like that, and I think that is in a way to one to keep me rooted and to keep me to my mission, and to stay, specifically with the podcast. I've always said I'm never going to have a conversation that I don't want to have myself. I've never been. I've of course had hundreds of messages from people who say, can you talk about this, can you talk about that? And it's not that they're not great ideas or anything. For me specifically, the podcast, that this is my safe haven. It's my place where I go, I'm going to have the conversations that I want to have. And I think that is what has always kept it fun for me. That is what has always kept it not feeling like, oh my gosh, that's potentially thousands and thousands of people listening. What do they want to listen to? I go, well, what I always kind of just root back to, what did 19-year-old Amber want to listen to? What did she, when she was pressing on that podcast, if she was to find, what would she have needed in that moment? What are the people that she should need to hear from and their experiences? And when I say that, it's not just from in the perspective of what does a 19-year-old need, just kind of what are the conversations that, though she might be 19, when she is then 28, as I am now, that she will be able to hear and appreciate, to think of that the longevity of it, of what does that 19-year-old girl need, and that stays at my core, and it's never led me astray. And I think just that is what has kept me just trying to stay me. And I think that is probably what is perhaps maybe set me aside in my work, of that I've never tried to be something that I'm not, because I simply just don't know how to be.
No, I don't think you have that. You're capable of that in the nicest possible way.
Yeah.
Because that is your superpower. And that's what another thing that was coming through for me is, you are now the person that 19-year-old Amber would have needed and wanted there for her. And when I joined one of your grief circles recently, it blew me away. Because I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting that level of community and what it brought up for me personally. And I lost my dad 30 odd years ago. And now I have anticipatory grief, because I have an 85-year-old mother who I see, like in slow decline. And I think even for that, and even knowing that your community is there, even someone like me, it's just like, you know where to go.
Exactly.
Right. There is a kind of, not so much a guidebook, but kind of, because it's shared experiences. Everyone was sharing their stories. And in a really raw way. Right. And I think you offer something. I know people say go to therapy, but like you say, therapy can be it's just a one-on-one. And I think that's what wasn't maybe working for you initially, but this is community. And it takes me back again to when my dad died. And I noticed it here, obviously, and it was like, with your mum, you said hundreds of people turned up to Sue's funeral, etc. So we had like coachloads of people turn up, because that's the Indian way. But when we went to India, when we took his ashes to India, it really upset me. And I was really angry for my mum, because they were grieving, sympathizing when they'd come over to my parents' home in the old-fashioned, historical, traditional way, which is, it was really out there and cray-cray to me. It scared me. It literally, I'd never seen my mum cry so much, and in the way that she was crying and breaking down. Like women, they were wailing, but it was almost in a really synchronized way. It was like it was an act, and I didn't like it. And they were like, they would walk in the gates just wailing. And then they would say things to my mum like, oh, you're never going to see him again, or oh, he's left you alone, and and I was just thinking, what the F are you upsetting my mum for like this? And I remember going up to this one elderly woman and saying, just kind of like,
Pump the
can you
brakes.
just stop that? Can you stop upsetting my mum in the way that you are? But looking back on it, I remember years afterwards, and I just thought, wow, you know what? She wasn't alone. These are people that she's grown up with. She's in her, childhood village that she grew up in, etc. And they can offer her something which we can't.
Yeah.
From, because she's not just our mum. She was that young girl.
Yeah.
She is their, niece or whatever capacity they're related to her in. And I guess even here we have a ritual where for 10 to 13 days, people will come over and everyone will eat at the house, etc. And it can be quite taxing.
Yeah.
But I think it really helps you with the grief because you're talking about that person, you're all sharing stories, etc. And then when you are left to the business of dealing with it on your own, as unfortunately you were straight away, it can be really harrowing. When you wake up in the morning and there's that, you forget for a moment, right? And then it suddenly hits you, that empty, harrowing feeling.
Totally. Yeah. I thank you for sharing that, Inja, because I think there's something. I'm currently reading a book about all various different cultures across the globe of how we grieve and how we mourn and how we cope with death and dying. And when I hear, experiences like you with your dad and other people from different cultures, I'm so envious. I'm so envious in a way because, and I think I smile because I think, gosh, there is so much for us to learn, and there is so much beauty in it. And what I loved about what you just shared there of, though I can, and so again, that both and piece, right, of you holding both, gosh, that was really hard to see these people kind of borderline maybe triggering your mum and really taking her to the depths of it and being agonized by that, but then also in time or maybe not long after of holding, oh, that was perhaps possibly one of the most deepest, beautiful display of mourning and grieving of they're calling a spade a spade. This is horrific. He has died. She is now widowed. And they are naming it. They are not kind of just brushing it under the rug, trying to fill it with platitudes of, oh, he's in a better place or this. They are looking at it and going, this is painful. This is end of life. This is a finality. And that is sad. And that is agony, and just calling it what it is. And I think it is actually when we do that, especially in the very early stages. And that's kind of why, like, when you do look at other cultures and how that's kind of something that I feel like is a journey for me to go on and to kind of explore globally what grief, death, and dying looks like, kind of post the immediacy, because I personally think in cultures that in the immediacy after a death really sit in like the wailing, the mourning, the ritual of what you need to do. The grieving process actually after that, I'm not saying it's seamless or it's easier, but there is a definitely different tone because they haven't got that feeling or that weight of, I don't feel like I've grieved or that I have wailed for this loss. I have not done that. Whereas in our culture in the UK, it is of kind of how, when I think back in context of my mum, she died, the shock of it as well. I think almost in a way too, and in Western society, we don't really know what to do with shock or how to treat it in a way. And kind of probably for your mum going to India and her being able to wail and to break down, for people to almost coax that out of her, to say like, he has gone forever, like letting that penny drop for her and being there to hold her as that penny drops is so like lifting the veil of shock and going, fuck, this really did happen. And to kind of let that seep out of you. And the other thing, that shock just it goes away immediately, but kind of to let that go, let that shock cloak you and go, oh my god, this actually happened, and to acknowledge it. And when I do think shock can be such a massive blocker in actually active grieving. So, and that's what I think in our Western society of how we have, whether it is a sudden loss or not, I'm not subjecting it just to a sudden loss, but my experience of sudden loss of how my mum was here. My mum was here on Friday morning and died by Saturday morning. It was like, what the fuck? How has that happened? And so that shock factor was there. And then going home and like her diary and her papers were still on the table, and like her coffee mug from the morning was still there. How does one's brain compute that? I can still smell her like from the shower in the morning, and like her perfume's like, what? And so how does your brain then compute that and then go into planning a funeral and then go back into going to work. No wonder we are almost so wired with grief and so like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this, because we simply just don't in our Western society allow even a minute just to go, oh my gosh,
No.
what has happened here? And that's the part that specifically in our Western world that really does get my goat about of how specifically in the workplaces or even in our
Yeah.
communities and friends and family, how they are so quick to demand people back to work and or
Yeah.
back into their social groups and friends and families and dynamics. And then they're shocked when they crumble. They're shocked when they can't write an email. They're shocked when they're perhaps crying at the dinner table with friends, because we're rushing a process that takes time, that takes the rest of our life. And that's not to say that, you know, we just lay down and die and let this grief take us whole for the rest of our days, but in that immediacy, if we just give people grace, just that small bit of grace, whether that, and that will of course vary for different people, whether it is a couple of weeks, a couple of months, maybe a year, who knows, right? But that immediacy, that tenderness is so vital. And it's so vital in how I think the continuous grieving process goes. And that's the part that like it's very heightened, and it is a tall measure of kind of like when someone does die, and the things that both, you know, whether it is friends, family, relationships, working environments, it does feel like a lot is riding on it, because it is really vital of how that person's individual experience of grief will go on to be. If you've had someone die and you have had no kind of community around you, that loneliness, oh my God, that will follow you for a very long time, because you will reflect and go, gosh, when I went through the hardest time in my life, where was my community? Even if you find it still, that wound is really, really deep. A lot to unpack there.
And a lot just to even just sit with. The whole somatic release, you know, whether it's like what is talk therapy about? It's about expression. And when we're in solitude, because we do, it doesn't matter if you're in community, you can still feel alone, right? As we know from the losses that close, you know, losses that we've unfortunately had to experience. But when you're in solitude with that, you need a release. And there will be many people who don't have these communities. And thankfully, you're providing this. And I'm only beginning during the course of this podcast to actually realize what a huge, actually, it's a bigger service than I actually had even fathomed now talking about it. But for the people who are on their own and don't have these communities, because there are a lot of lonely people, you know, I find that in the people that come to me. I remember saying to a client recently, well, a few months back, so who's your support system? And this amazing man, you know, like top of his game, profession, everything, he just said, he has depression. He says, my medication and you. And I was like, wow, okay, that's like a lot of responsibility. So I was like, okay, let's see who else there is in your life. But even through that somatic releasing that, you know, you touched on with me talking about the wailing, and this is going to sound really freaky, but I'm going to share it anyway. So I live in an area where there's a lot of woodland and forest. And literally, if I walk out the door and around the corner, there's a forest there. And sometimes when I just want to release, whether I'm angry about something or whether I've just literally been working a lot, I will literally go there and not just have a scream, because, you know, we've all heard that, scream into your pillow, go somewhere to, you know, cliff top and have a scream or something. But there's this real, the Indian way, and the Red Indians do it a lot. It is a kind of wailing, and there's no rhyme nor rhythm to it. You just go with how you feel and release it.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. Yeah. It's cathartic. It's such a release. And it's funny how sometimes it becomes really joyful as well along the way, because you're touching base with you, you know. And I really believe that we here today embody and are doing the work, standing on the shoulders of all of our ancestors and what they had to endure and what they had to do. And it's like I had a period when I encountered bullying in a place which we were both at. And lots of people were being bullied by the same person and nobody stood up. And And I just did, because that's just my way, because I'm a Sikh and I'm raised as this little warrior.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I tried to take it up for other people and I was told, oh, you can't, they've got to, it's got to be them who comes forward. And then I started to be targeted, so I did go forward. And do you know why I did it? Someone said, oh, weren't you scared? Or weren't you scared of losing your job? And I said, no. I said, because when my parents came to this country, these rules, laws, and legislations weren't in place.
Yeah.
They could be racially abused. They could be. My father had to cut his turban in order to get a job. That would not happen today, right? And they did it because they have children to feed.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, because I'm not just doing it for me. I'm doing it for all of these people who haven't had the courage to do it because they think they're going to lose their jobs. Whereas I stand in the conviction that I can't lose my job for standing up for what is right.
Exactly.
And also, I'd be spitting in the face of my parents, my ancestors, if I didn't use my voice now.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard. It literally took me down.
Mm-hmm.
But it worked out.
Exactly.
And afterwards, it was management were coming up to me and saying to me, oh, good on you that you did that. And I remember being very angry at that time because it had taken its toll on me. And I just said, no, you should have done that. You saw this happening. You should have done it.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have been left to me.
To do on your own.
But it was like, come what may, I'm going to do this. So I think the work that we're doing now, even, we're not just doing it for ourselves and for the people around us now and for people to come, but we're doing it thanks to
absolutely
the generations that have gone before us.
Absolutely.
And I literally call upon my ancestors all the time. We're getting into a totally different topic now, so I'll wind myself back
I love
in.
that though. Oh my gosh, that's a whole nother. I'll just say to you now, I can probably go for another 5 minutes. That's okay.
Okay. Nope. Super.
Oh yeah, till 1:05. So we're good.
That's absolutely fine. I had all these questions to ask you, and I haven't asked you any of them because the conversation is just flowed.
You can always have me back for a part 2. Is there
definitely, Amber? Definitely.
Yeah, I mean,
but you've answered most of them.
Have I? I'll respond back to just that last part. I just love that because I think that's so beautiful. I've not got to this stage in my work, in my career, and in my sense of self alone. And that's not just down to, of course, the community, but down to, yes, my ancestors and to my mum and to the amazing teachers that they were. And I think for me, when I think about the work specifically that I do and talking about grief and breaking the cycle of talking about grief in family dynamics and grief as a whole, it does make me reflect and think about how, what was grief portrayed as in the households that I grew up in. And I absolutely have broken, generational, when I say curses, but generational ideologies of, when I think back to my mum's mum, my grandmother, she died 2 weeks after giving birth to my mum. So my mum grew up without her mother, and my mum was raised by her aunties and her grandmothers. And in a way, talking about my grandmother was really quite painful for quite a lot of people in my family. And she wasn't hidden. And then my grandfather remarried and went on to have 2 other children, my aunties. And it just really did feel like my nan was just kind of this forgotten character, except for maybe her sister, my great auntie, who's also now died. And it kind of felt like she was kind of forgotten about. I can understand the pain. She was 22 when she died. It was horrific, and died in childbirth, and there was now this baby without her mother, and the horrors of that. And I think the way grief has kind of been, it was so interesting in my family because grief, the actual pain of talking about her loss specifically was really quite hidden, but there was still such a yearning, or there was still such a display of emotion. I would see my mum sometimes cry but she would always, she's like, I can't grieve for what I didn't have, but there was always still that longing of what could have been. So there was always this kind of gentle tone of grief there, but not really explicitly talking about it. Like, grief followed our family and death followed our family, and in a way we just kind of all looked the other way. And I remember after my mum had died thinking, oh, I want to ask my granddad about like my nan, or even when my mum was here, and she was kind of a bit like, oh, maybe don't, like, he gets too upset about it. It was kind of like, why can't we talk about these amazing people that have gone before us? Like, I want to know. And it is hard of these things when the memories are so limited, or the people who have had access to those memories are now no longer here. And that's why I think for me, and like specifically my brother, with our next generation and with his children specifically here now, we're very active in that we do talk about mum and what she was like and what she still means to us, so that they don't ever have to, when they get older, speculate about who is my nanny Sue, they have these strong stories that we have fed to them, and they don't really have to speculate. Of course, the grief and the pain, they will never know her, but we're doing our best to bring our ancestors forward and to tell them about them and what they went through and who they were and the joy they brought to lives.
She lives on through
She
our
lives on.
conversations, through your conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
They all live and breathe as long as we keep talking about them.
Exactly.
I just wrote something down there, and there's two things. And the first thing I wrote down is when you were talking about you'd love to have spoken to your grandparents, etc. A question a lot of people ask is, if you could go back in time and have coffee with anyone, or just if you could have coffee with anyone, living or past, who would that be? I'm going to ask you that question, but I remember somebody asked me that question recently on a podcast that I was on. And I didn't even have to think about it, because I just went, my dad, because my dad has been my loss.
Yeah.
He was my first loss. He's been my biggest loss. And I immediately thought, he died at 54. He was young, like your mum. And I just thought, I remember hitting 54 myself. And I didn't want to celebrate that year. I'm not big on birthdays anyway, but I just didn't want to celebrate that year, because I was like, I don't know anything about life. Like, I am just muddling my way through. And imagine he died at this age when he still, but he had achieved so much more than me. But I was thinking, I don't know anything. So I wonder how he must have felt. Because we just look at our parents as our parents, right? And when I did my attachment diploma, it took me back to, I started having these conversations with my mom about, what was it like when I was born? Actually, what was it like when you were born, coming from a rural, remote little village in an agricultural community where girls weren't really celebrated? And then seeing her through her stories as a little girl, it was just such a beautiful thing. And we continue to have these conversations. So, but when I turned 54, because my dad had died at 54, it was huge. And I'm guessing that comes up a lot in your work as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why when I hit 60, I'm so psyched about being 60. And I celebrated it, and I hadn't wanted to. But like, my girlfriend kind of like made me, and it turned into this beautiful thing. I want to ask you, having shared that, who would you have coffee with?
Yeah, that's such
Living
a good
or
question.
past?
That's a
And
really
why?
good question. I am feeling, oh God, I feel like I want to have tea with all of the women in my life and my previous ancestors. Like if I could have a tea party, can I have a tea party, if that's okay? I almost just want to, and the reason why I say I want all of them there, so I would have my mum, both my paternal, maternal grandmother, my mum's aunties, because these, like, when I think of, and specifically when I think of my mum, and after her mum died, and she was raised by her two grandmothers, both on her maternal and paternal, her maternal aunties, as well. Like, that was true womanhood. Like, when I think about it, that was radical. Like, and they all had their own children as well to raise. And it was kind of like, our sister has died and we have to raise this baby. And I think about that, and I think that's, like, for me, like, that's where I get emotional, because I think the women in our lives are so important. Like our girls are so important to us. And I love my girls in my life. I love the women in my life. I'm a girl's girl through and through. And I think if I was just to go back in time and just sit with them and ask anything, I don't know, I'd just be like, what does it mean to you to be a woman? What's their raucous stories of girlhood? And, even maybe asking my mum of, like, what was, as you look down the barrel of motherhood. But then I don't even think I'd even ask my mum about becoming a mum, because I just want to ask her about her, and what her 20s were like, and just what made her smile, what made her giggle, what made my mum her mum, and learn about her just as a woman, as woman to woman. And I think that's probably one of the most painful things about the loss of my mum, is that we were robbed of, she was my caretaker until I was 19. She was a carer, she was my mum, and we were robbed of the chance to get to know her as woman to woman. But weirdly, India, I feel I've gotten to know my mum so much more in the years that she has died than when she was here. And I feel our bond is really strong. I get to know her, and I think she gets to know me in more ways than we ever had in those 19 years. Oh, look at us blubbering.
And you know what? It's okay. We're both avoidants. Do you know that? So at my core, I'm an avoidant, and I know you are from listening to your interviews and everything. But the fact And I often wonder about your humour and how that used to initially really play a big part, and how that was a little bit of a like, oh, let's just keep a little bit over there. I love that this is a side of you that I don't see.
Yeah, and you know it is. I feel I do feel that avoidant part, but I think there is part of me. I have no problem crying and getting into the bones of it. I think I love the balance of both, of being able to laugh through it or to have a jest, but to also go like, gosh, yeah, I speculate and think, you know, I should never have had to lost my mother at 19 and the agony of that. But, and again, that both and piece of there's been so much pain in my 20s, so much pain. But I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the joy as well.
Amber Jeffrey, thank you so much. It's been an honour. I'm going to cry. It's been an honour. And this is what your community is about. This is really demonstrative of the kind of conversations that you have in your, grief circles. Thank you so much.
Thank you, India.
It's been a real honour, honestly. And can I ask, if people want to connect with you, which I'm sure people will, where can they find you, Amber?
Of course. Thank you, India. It's been an absolute delight. And yeah, it just feels like old times, us just chatting in the lunchroom at Virgin. If you want to find me, you can find me. My website is www.thegriefgang.com, and on there you will find a whole host of like my services that I offer, such as the Grief Gang group circles, which are the most popular kind of service where you can find and meet others in the community, and we go through a 7-week program essentially together, or one-to-one mentoring. So that's all the kind of businessy stuff up there. And then if you want to connect on social media, I'm on all platforms, the Grief Gang, and of course the Grief Gang podcast. And come into the DMs. I will, as much as I can be really slow with replies, I will always endeavour to get back to you and share or signpost you to, if I can't offer you something, to signpost you to somewhere that will. And just know that there is a humongous community out there waiting for you should you so need it and desire it.
Thank you. And as you say, it's the gang that you didn't choose to be a part of, right? But there is a community there to support.
Exactly.
Amber, thank you. If you just hold on, because I want to chat to you just a moment.
Of course.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amber, but thank you, everyone, for joining Amber and I, and in this little chat of ours. I really value your time. I know time is precious, as Amber's just mentioned. She's just dashing off for something, and it does take us time sometimes to respond. But thank you so much. I really value your time for listening wherever you are. And for those of you who are new here, welcome. And thank you for being a part of this community. And if you have a conversation, a story to share, reach out. If any of what Amber and I have talked about here today has landed with you, just drop a little comment in the comments down below. Subscribe, follow. And if you know anyone who would benefit from this episode, please share. And until we meet again, because I drop these episodes on the 1st of every month. And until the next episode, lead with love. Approach everything and everyone, including yourself, with curiosity, with a view to understand. Thank you.
Thank you.